Okay, so let's dive into one of the weirdest, no, probably the weirdest chapter in all of military history. A time when a professional army armed with machine guns literally went to war against a flock of birds. And no, this is not a joke. This is the absolutely true story of Australia's Great Emu War of 1932.
So let's just get right to it. You've got trained soldiers, machine guns, and a whole lot of ammo on one side. On the other, a giant flock of flightless birds. I mean, that sounds like a ridiculously one-sided fight, right? Well, you might want to hold that thought, because this story does not go the way you think it will.
So how on earth does a nation find itself at war with its own wildlife? To really get it, you have to picture Western Australia back in 1932. A real perfect storm was brewing, and the local farmers were caught right in the middle of it.
See, here's what was happening. After World War I, a bunch of Australian veterans were given land to start farms out west. But then, boom, the Great Depression hits. The price of wheat just collapses, and these farmers are pushed right to the very edge. And just when they thought things couldn't possibly get any worse, well, that's when the emus arrived.
And listen, we're not talking about a few birds pecking at scraps. We're talking about an estimated 20,000 emus. They were on their annual migration, and they stumbled upon these farms with all their fresh water and tasty wheat and thought, yeah, this looks like a great spot. They tore down fences, they absolutely flattened crops, and they drove these already struggling farmers to their breaking point. So the farmers, many of them ex-soldiers themselves, were completely desperate. They went to the government, begging for help. They even suggested bringing in machine guns. And unbelievably, the Minister for Defense, a guy named Sir George Pearce, he actually agreed. And that's where the military gets involved, with what they thought was a super simple solution.
And just like that, it was official. This wasn't going to be some simple pest control operation. Oh no. This was a full-blown military campaign. They deployed the Royal Australian Artillery, armed them with 2 Lewis machine guns, we're talking weapons fresh from the battlefields of World War I, and gave them 10,000 rounds of ammunition.
So let's look at the tail of the tape here. On paper, it's a total slaughter, right? You've got Major Meredith, a couple of soldiers, 2 heavy machine guns, and all that ammo against a bunch of birds. But the emus, well, they had a few tricks up their sleeve. They could run up to 50 kilometers an hour. Their main tactic was to scatter like guerrilla fighters, and get this, their feathers actually acted as a weird kind of surprisingly effective armor. The army was about to learn that this was not going to be simple target practice. All right, so the operation kicks off. The soldiers are ready, the media is there to report on what everyone assumes will be a quick victory, but the emus, well, the emus had other ideas. The whole thing almost immediately turned into a complete and total farce.
The very first engagement on November 2nd was a complete bust. The birds were too fast. When the soldiers got close, the emus would just split up into tiny groups and run in every direction. The army burned through hundreds of rounds for maybe a handful of kills. In fact, just 6 days later, they called the whole thing off. But the farmers kicked up a fuss, there was a ton of political pressure, so the military went back out there on November 13th, only to give up for good less than a month later. And hey, don't just take my word for how tough these birds were. Listen to what the commanding officer, Major Meredith himself, said. He's comparing them to tanks. He's saying they have the invulnerability of tanks against machine guns. His soldiers were just totally outclassed and outmaneuvered by these birds who are way faster, way smarter, and a whole lot tougher than anybody gave them credit for.
And if you want to see just how bad it really was, well, the numbers here don't lie. The Army fired almost 10,000 rounds of ammunition, and the final tally, just 986 confirmed kills. That works out to more than 10 bullets fired for every single bird they managed to hit. By any possible measure, it was a spectacular, embarrassing failure.
So yeah, after being thoroughly outsmarted and, frankly, humiliated, the military packed up its guns and went home. What followed was a pretty shameful retreat and the start of a national inside joke that, honestly, lasts to this very day.
You can just imagine, right? The media had an absolute field day with this story. Politicians in Parliament were openly making fun of the Army's failure. There was even a serious suggestion that the emus should be awarded military medals for their victory. It was just a moment of pure, uncut humiliation for the Australian military.
So what's the legacy here? The Great Emu War has gone down in history as this perfectly bizarre cautionary tale about human arrogance, and a pretty stark reminder not to underestimate Mother Nature. And the best part, the most ironic twist,
After the military's huge failure, the government finally approved a bounty system, and it turned out the real solution was just building taller, stronger fences. Simple engineering worked where machine guns had completely failed.
So in the end, the Great Emu War wraps up not with a bang, but with a fence post. It's a hilarious piece of history, for sure, but it really leaves you with a pretty big question, doesn't it? In our endless mission to manage and control the natural world, how often are we still bringing machine guns to problems that really just need a better fence?